Hi everyone. So in this video, I'm going to go over the PowerPoint here in week 1 module on Intro to Drama, because that is the first sort of genre of literature that we are going to study. We're not going to spend a terribly long time on it, but we will be reading a play. In fact, we'll be doing that for homework this week. It's on the shorter side as far as plays go. And I've also included a video where you can watch a performance of this play. So to sort of prepare us for that, here in this lesson, we're going to learn a little bit more about drama, how to read a play. It's important to know how to do that. Normally a play, we watch it. So how do you read a play? Learning about dramatic structure and then thinking about characters, right? So let's go ahead and take a look here at the PowerPoint. Okay. All right. So introduction to drama. We're going to look at sort of the differences between watching a play and reading one. We're going to talk about dialogue and why it is so important to a play, to understanding a play. How we need to listen imaginatively, how we need pay attention to the written words and use our imaginations. And then looking at some more of the technical elements of drama and the elements of a theater and a stage, and the importance of sort of picturing what should be happening on the stage as you read through the play. All right, so how do I read a play? Step 1, listen to the lines. And even if you're reading it, it's paying attention to the lines. So although plays are, of course, meant to be performed, they do share a lot of qualities with other types of creative writing, like short stories and novels and, even like movie scripts. So we can read and study a play just like we would a poem or a short story or a novel. But, when we're only reading the play, we do not have the actors' voices and gestures to help us interpret the lines written. We don't necessarily have that visual and audio to help establish the characters. And playwrights rely almost entirely on dialogue to define character, to develop the plot, to, kind of convey the message, the theme of the play. So when you're reading it, you kind of have to hear the lines in your mind. You could read the lines out loud, or, if you think back to like grade school, junior high, high school, you may have actually read a play in class and, your teacher made you sort of get in groups and act out scenes from the play, I don't really think that as adults we do that very much. But, at the very least, reading them out loud will kind of help you like make decisions about how to say the words, the tone, the inflection, the intention of the lines. Because reading it, you can just read it straight through monotone. But if you're saying it out loud, then you have to think about, well, how would this be said? And it kind of helps you figure out a little bit more about each character and the play as a whole. So, obviously it's helpful to view the play because some of that work is done for you. But even when you read it, you can sort of stop and return to lines and speeches that are complicated or meaningful. So in a play, when you're watching it, if an important scene happens, once the actors move past that scene, it's done. But if you're reading it, you can go back and reread it as many times as you need to fully understand what's happening. That's one advantage to reading it. All right. So step 2 in reading a play is visualize the scene, right? Imagine what the stage would look like. More than likely, you're going to think of a traditional theater where, there's a raised stage and the audience sits back here There's a proscenium or an archway, right? That's where the curtain hangs from. And then if the curtain is down, there's this area in front of the curtain where the stage still exists. That's called the apron. We also have stage directions. And in a place, you know, sometimes the playwright will actually include stage directions in italics. And that indicates where the playwright wants the actors to move, right? So we have upstage, which means towards the back of the stage, and downstage, which means towards the front of the stage, closer to the audience. Which is kind of funny because we always use the phrase, you know, oh, he's trying to upstage her. When really, if he's trying to upstage her, he's moving further back. It's really like he's trying to downstage her, right? Coming closer to the audience. So he is in the forefront. But for whatever reason, we have made it, you're trying to upstage somebody. But upstage is actually the back, towards the back of the stage. Downstage is towards the front, closer to the audience. And then we have, you got to think about, you know, the setting. Some plays are performed with very little props or scenery. Others have way more elaborate set designs. They use these things called flats, which is like a canvas covered frame. And you can actually have them like trifold where it can create walls of a room. And then you can have really elaborate sets. And obviously, I think the higher up you go in terms of theater production, the more elaborate and technical the set designs become, right? That's sort of what we typically think of when we think about theater and the stage on which a play is performed. There's also something called theater in the round, which was made famous during Shakespeare's time. Most of his work was done in the theater in the round, which is where you have the audience is in raised seats all around the stage. So the stage is this round space in the middle. And so you could see it from all sides, right? There was no backstage, there was no sides, you know, side stage, it was round. And the aisles through the audience were the same aisles that the stagehands and actors used. So it was almost interactive. But I think to go to a theater in the round these days, it would have to be at a pretty special location. Most of the plays that we would see going to any common theater these days would be a traditional theater. And this is sort of what it looks like. So you can kind of see here, this right here, this archway, that's the proscenium. So it's almost like it creates a frame, like almost like a TV or a movie screen. Like it's directing your gaze there, that archway, right? When the curtain is down, it's almost like, you know, we can't, almost like this, the screen, the movie screen is blank or the TV screen is blank, right? And this area here that comes forward, you know, that we can still see even when the curtain's down, that's the apron, right? And then, you know, we have our stage directions here. So upstage is towards the back, downstage is here towards the front. Stage left is over here because it's all from the actor's point of view. So when the actor is on stage looking out at the audience, stage left is here. Their right is over here. That's stage right. Oh, whoops. And then these are some examples of the flats that I was talking about to create scenery and setting. You know, so this is one of those trifold ones. You know, you can kind of move it to create dimension of a room or an outdoor setting even. And if you were to look at the back side of it, there would be sort of like a prop, you know, a bar coming down and connected, and so that it kind of stays upright. If you go kind of more high-end theater, or basically where there's more money for sets, they'll even be on wheels. They can be rolled around. They could be double-sided, so like, you know, still on wheels, but one side is for one scene, and then you can turn it, and the other side works for another scene. It can get very elaborate. This is sort of a kind of a classic-looking theater production here. Right. So you want to think about how that stage looks and how the actors would be performing on the stage. You have to always think of the play within that framework of the theater, of the stage. All right. Here. So step 3 for how to read a play, you then have to envision the action, right? You have to, because drama relies so heavily on movement and gesture and setting. And those details might not be included in the stage directions. Some playwrights are very sparse with their stage directions. There's hardly anything. Others are more detailed. And when you have a playwright that does not include a lot of stage directions, then it's sort of up to the director to decide what makes the most sense. Where should the setting be? Where, what kind of backdrops, what kind of flats, what kind of, where are the actors going to be positioned? Where are they going to move to and from? As the dialogue is happening, are they going to be close to each other? Are they going to be further away? So some of that is based on picking up on clues from the lines of the play. And then sometimes it's really just what the director feels makes the most sense for the scene. But you have to think about those things. You have to use your own imagination and your critical thinking skills to envision the action. Because simply reading the lines isn't going to help you understand the plot, the characters, or the theme. Also, while you're reading a play, and those are the 3 steps, for how to read a play. Listen to the lines, envision the stage, envision, the action, those 3 steps. But along the way, you should also keep in mind some critical questions that you should be asking as the play progresses. So what is the central conflict of the play? How is it resolved? Are there any secondary conflicts or subplots? And how do they relate to the main conflict? Does the play follow a traditional dramatic structure, which we're going to learn about here in just a moment? What is the climax? Is there a denouement? And if that's a funny sounding word, we're going to learn about it in a moment. That's part of dramatic structure. Who is the main character or protagonist? What sort of person is he or she? Does this protagonist have a fatal flaw? Is the protagonist a hero? Who is the main character? Or it could be more than one main character. Is the antagonist is the person or force that opposes the protagonist. Is the antagonist a person? Is it an environment? Is it a social force, right? So you can have a protagonist, the hero of the story, who is facing off against another individual. You could have the hero of the play who is facing off and trying to overcome, being lost in the woods on a cold, snowy night. So then he's battling the environment. Or it could be, a protagonist who is battling some sort of social injustice. Right? If the antagonist is a person, does that person cause the conflict intentionally? Or was it just, kind of the road to hell is paved with good intentions? Maybe they didn't intend for anything bad to happen. They didn't intend for this conflict to come up, but it did. Or do they have a bit of an evil streak and they set it in motion on purpose? Things to think about. Do the other characters in the play provide any kind of exposition or background information for us? We don't get a narrator in a play typically. It could be a character. There could be a character written into the play that is sort of like a narrator, but most of the time it's not. So if we need any kind of background information to explain how this play starts, why, what's going on, we have to rely on the characters to converse about it. There has to be dialogue of some sort. So are those other characters, the secondary characters, are they providing that background information for us? Or are they used as foils to oppose or contrast and help us better understand the main characters? When I think about the setting of the play, how important is the time and setting. Could the play could be just as effective in another time or place? Or is the time and place significant? Does the title provide any clues to understand the play? The title is typically, it means something. What is the theme of the play? Sort of the underlying message, not the subject matter of the play, the theme. The underlying message, the lesson we're supposed to learn, the message that the playwright is hoping we get from the play. Can you state it in a single sentence? Is the play a tragedy, a comedy, or a mixture? Does it matter? Is the presentation realistic? Does the playwright, include any kind of stage directions for theatrical devices like lighting or music or costumes or anything about the setting, or does it seem unrealistic? What is your impression about that? All of these very important questions to sort of keep in mind as you read. It's not like you have to come back and answer every single one of them or even write down your answers. It's just, these are good questions to consider as you read a play, because if you're considering these questions and coming up with answers, then you will begin to develop a stronger understanding of the play, the theme, the plot, the characters, all of that. Right. So the next chapter, chapter 29, focuses more on that dramatic structure I mentioned. And the structure is literally how the action progresses. And there are 6 stages in a tradition, sort of conventional dramatic structure. Point of attack, exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, and the denouement. So we're going to go through each one of these, right? So dramatic structure is how the plot unfolds. They got to get our attention early on, and they got to keep it until the conclusion of the play. At least we hope they do. We really hope that we're not sitting there in the audience and by 10 minutes in, we're bored to tears. The playwright has to capture our attention. The director has to make sure that they are delivering on that with how they have directed the play. The actors have to do that with engaging performances, right? But a big part of it is the story, the plot, right? It needs to hold our attention. And the heart of the plot is the conflict. The thing that creates tension and keeps us interested because we want to see, it's building up to something. We want to see that climax and we want to see how it turns out. At least hopefully we do, if they've done their job well. And the 2 sides of the conflict, again, we're going to have our protagonist and our antagonist, right? The protagonist is our hero, the person we're supposed to, root for in a way. The antagonist is what that hero is up against. Often another character. But again, it could be the environment or it could be some sort of social norm that they're fighting against. But that fundamental struggle between protagonist and antagonist is developed according to a pattern that audiences have become familiar with over thousands of years. And even today, we somewhat still expect that structure, that pattern to be followed. I think a modern audience is a little more understanding or accepting of a story that does not follow the typical pattern, especially when it comes to TV shows and movies. But I think really for theater, we do still sort of expect it to follow this set pattern of dramatic structure. So we start with our point of attack. This is the starting point of the play, right? Where the play begins, the point of attack. Now, when the play begins, the curtain rises and, the actors appear on stage for the first time and start saying their lines. That moment is our point of attack in terms of dramatic structure. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that the play is beginning at the beginning of the story. Typically, that's how we expect it. We start at the beginning and work our way to the end. But, we could begin in the middle of things or even near the end, and then gradually the character, events are revealed that have already taken place, and it sort of catches us up to speed, if you will. You can think of a movie or a TV show that starts with some sort of, suspenseful moment or a tragic moment. And we really don't know what's going on. We have no idea, but we can tell that it's a big moment. It's important. And then the scene will cut, and then the next scene of the movie begins at a previous point in time. And then from there, the movie catches us up to that moment that we saw in the first scene. Sometimes it can be very disjointed, and you can start in one place and go to the past and then go even further ahead in the future and then back in the past. And it kind of gets very convoluted. I think the movie Pulp Fiction, that's a great example of that. But theater typically follows that straight line pattern. But if the playwright does decide to sort of plop us in right in the middle of the action, there will be something. Dialogue between characters, a monologue from a character, something that explains how we got to this point. But point of attack is, so it's not necessarily the beginning of the story. The point of attack is the beginning of the play, the beginning of the action. Where are we starting? Right? Then we have our exposition. In a story, this would be where the narrator tells us any background information we need to know. In a movie, this is where we might get a voiceover, kind of explaining things or introducing us to different characters. But in a play, it's done by characters delivering lines, perhaps a conversation that several characters are having, and along the way they are each revealing important information to the audience. That background information to help us understand more. It could be one character on stage giving a monologue where it's like a speech kind of, but when we get sort of that background information to fill us in on what where we're at with these in this moment in time, that's exposition. Then we have our rising action. Once we've kind of gotten our bearings with the exposition, then the tension starts to build, right? Our interest becomes stronger if they do the rising action well. This is where the protagonist and the antagonist are moving steadily toward a confrontation. Then we have our climax. This is the play's high point. This is just like the climax of a movie or an episode of television or a novel. This is what it's all building to, right? The high point. It is the showdown between the protagonist and the antagonist. It's often thought of like as a single moment, a fight, a duel, making it through the snowstorm, if you're out caught in the woods. But it could also be a series of events. It could be several small things, right, that sort of become the climax. But once we reach that climax, it is the point of no return. We know that there's, this confrontation has to occur, and whatever happens after happens. We don't know what that's going to be, but there's no turning back now. It's going to happen. Once it does happen, then we have the falling action. Everything starts to unravel, events fall into place. We are moving more towards the final resolution or the final scene of the play. This is not necessarily like if you think in a movie, the climax is some really huge fight. The falling action is what's happening right after that fight. Hopefully our hero won the fight and he's, surrounded by his friends and family or onlookers who were there supporting him, or maybe it's just one person who's there to tend to him and make sure he's okay. And, he's exhausted, maybe wounded, right? That's the falling action. The climax has occurred, but the falling action is like what happens right afterwards. Not necessarily any kind of resolution or like final thoughts. It's literally just what we see in the immediate aftermath of the climax. Then we get what's called the denouement. It literally means untying. And this is the play's conclusion. This is where we get an explanation or the outcome of the action. And the lovers kiss, the bodies are carried off the stage, the audience goes home. This is, in a movie, this would be where after the climax and they, the best friend carries helps the hero, walk away, limping, leaning on the best friend, bloody, wounded. We imagine taking them to the hospital, perhaps. The denouement would be like the very last scene in the movie, like a week later when, the love interest comes to visit in the hospital and you can tell they're going to have a happy ever after, right? Something like that. It is, what lets us know that immediately following that climax, how the characters are going to move on from that. We don't get all the details, but it at least gives us a feeling, a sense of where they're headed. That makes sense? Hope so. All right. So that's dramatic structure. And while you're reading the play for homework this week, think about the dramatic structure. What is our point of attack? Do we get any exposition? And if so, which characters provide it? What is the rising action? What is the climax? Is there just one moment or is it several moments that create the climax? Do we have any falling action? If so, what is it? Do we have a denouement? If so, what is it? To think about the dramatic structure. The next thing you want to think about is the characters, right? So we're going to look at the difference between the classic tragic hero and the modern tragic hero. Why they have to be tragic, I don't know, but it's drama, and that is typically how it goes. All right, so the classical tragic hero comes from Aristotle. All right, so he stated that the classic concept of the tragic hero is someone who is highly renowned and prosperous. So that is probably why in a lot of really old dramatic pieces, the character who is the main character is someone, really well known, probably royalty of some sort. It's never just an everyday person. It's always someone of stature. And the tragedy involves the destruction of that noble person due to a character flaw. So it's usually a disproportionate measure of a specific human attribute, such as pride or jealousy or indecision. Perhaps it's the tragic flaw of being vengeful. But typically, our heroes in classic drama are rich, noble, typically men, who are either too prideful, too jealous, too arrogant, too indecisive, and that leads to their downfall. That leads to their tragedy, their conflict. Because it was really believed back then, and especially put forth by Aristotle, that if you had too much pride, if you had too much jealousy, if you had too much indecision, too much arrogance, whatever, it just you were doomed to some sort of tragic moment, possibly an entirely tragic life. But at the very least, those character flaws would bring about some moment of tragedy for you. However, in 1949, a modern playwright named Arthur Miller came up with sort of a new definition of a tragic hero, and we call it the modern tragic hero. And for Miller, the modern tragic hero does not have to be highly renowned and prosperous. In fact, it's very likely that the modern tragic hero is just your everyday guy, everyday gal. His modern hero really emphasized more a clash between the character and the environment, specifically the social environment. And so the hero no longer has to be noble. It doesn't have to be this rich white guy or this, noble royal white guy. He gains his own stature throughout the play because he goes up against the cosmos. He goes up against fate. He goes up against society. So he gains his notoriety and his value through the action of the play and how he handles himself. It's not that he automatically has the prosperity and the fame or the notoriety that the classic hero had. It's really more that there is a conflict between the ideal self-image and reality. What we wish we were, what we're told to wish we are, versus the reality of who we are. The ideal self-image telling us that we should be successful and rich, versus the reality of who we actually are. Or the ideal self-image is that we are thin and with blonde hair and blue eyes, versus what we really are. Or maybe the ideal self-image is that we're supposed to be super curvy and voluptuous. That's the ideal self-image. We're just not that. Our reality is different than what the ideal self-image. So it's going up against those ideas. So, as you're reading the play Trifles by Susan Glasgow, don't forget to use the 3 steps for reading a play. Don't forget to ask yourself critical questions while you're reading it. Try to identify the 6 stages of dramatic structure. Think about the characters. Is there a hero? Who is it? Is it just one person, or is it more than one person? Is there an antagonist? Is it a person or the environment or a social force? And if we do have a protagonist, if we have a hero, is it a classical tragic hero or a modern tragic hero? You're not necessarily going to find all of these things in this one particular play. It's not like every single play has to have every single one of these components, but see if it does. See if you can answer those questions. Right? Right. That's it for now. If you have questions about anything in the lesson, let me know. Otherwise, I hope y'all enjoy reading and or watching the play Trifles by Susan Glasgow.